Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to take a look at my first draft ahead of the 24-25 FPL season. As it's the first video, please do remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. Without further ado, let's get cracking. Right then, so let's get straight into it. But before we do, I do have a mini league this season for the first time ever, thanks to quite a lot of support last year. This year, the mini league code is just above me. It's RQ7NIR. Just input that in the mini league code and you'll get into the FPL Pricey mini league for this season. Prizes possibly to come. Let me know in the comments below what you think a good prize would be, and before the start of the season we'll try and get that locked in. In the meantime, let's start taking a look at the first draft. Obviously, things will change between now and the start of the FPL season, but I'm liking the look of this draft. I think it's pretty balanced, and I'll walk you through some of the logic behind a lot of the players that I've picked today. So to start off with, in goal, I've gone with the West Ham double up of Areola and Fabianski. Now, the reason I like this double up in particular doesn't really have anything to do with the fixtures to start off the season with. The first three are not particularly amazing. I wouldn't also call them terrible, but Aston Villa at home is probably not the best fixture to start off with. Now, one of the alternatives, Sanchez at 4.5 for Chelsea, starts off with Man City at home in the first game of the season. So I do think this is slightly better than that at least. And the advantage of this double up is at 8.5 million between them, it's very affordable to get to. And it means that if Areola was injured, if he got rotated out for Fabianski, you're not paying any extra. You're always going to have a starting keeper no matter what. And Areola, I think out of all the 4.5 million keepers in the game this year, I'm pretty sure he had the highest points per game when it came to the previous FPL season as well. So he should be pretty good value. He does get quite a few saves. And West Ham, under new management, you'd expect to be slightly better than they have been in the last season in the Premier League as well. So I really like it as a double up. But it must be said, there are quite a few different 4.5 keepers that I've got my eye on at the moment. And I'll probably put out a full video on the keepers and which one looks like the most optimal route towards the start of the season. In the meantime, let's have a look at the defence. And Trent Alexander-Arnold is a player that I would love to squeeze into my draft if at all possible. At the moment, this draft is worth exactly 100 million. I don't have any wiggle room. And I think if I was going to make one sacrifice with this draft to make other players more affordable, it would be Trent that probably goes. But under the new system that Liverpool will play, it looks likely that Trent will almost be playing a right midfield role at times. And we all know how good he is. We all know what sort of creative ability he has down that right flank. And I think Arne Slot will get the best out of him yet again. He has been dropped down to 7 million. I think that's a wise choice after last season's performance. I still think he could maintain good value for us and become a factor once again in our FPL side. The other reason I like him is because he's come into the game as the highest price FPL defender. Now, that might actually be something that you might not like. However, I do quite like it because he is only 7 million. He is still affordable. And it means that if at any point I change my mind on him, I can get to any other defender in the game in just one transfer. So let's say an Arsenal defender became really good value, maybe Gvardiol at Man City or Trippier at Newcastle. I can get to any of those in one transfer. I don't need to burn two by upgrading a 4.5 million defender. Speaking of the 4.5 million defenders, I do have 3 in my side at the moment. I think there are loads representing good value this season. I might even go into game week 1 with 4 of them. So I'm not ruling that out at the moment. I could save money from Trent and bring it down to another 4.5 because I genuinely think there are lots of them. And again, I might be making a show dedicated to those 4.5 million defenders and picking out the best ones and the best combination as well. In the meantime, though, I really like Dunk and I really like Mykolenko. I won't go into too much detail on both, but the fixtures are decent. Dunk does obviously have good set-piece threat, and you'd expect them to be tighter at the back under Hertzler than they were under De Zerbi. He should also rack up the passes and hopefully be good on the BPS. And again, at 4.5 million, I think that's 0.5 underrated for Dunk. So I think that's good value. Brighton's defence statistically was pretty decent last season, and I expect them to be slightly better again this season. So I think that represents good value. And the same goes for Mykolenko, who, again, I think is 0.5 too cheap. The reason for that is because Branthwaite and Tarkowski and Pickford have all come into the game at 5 million. So the Everton defence, being one of the tighter defences last season, I think 5 million would have represented good value for Mykolenko too, especially as he is also a consistent starter like the other three I've already. He's got a bit of attacking threat too down the wing. So again, Mykolenko, I do expect to represent decent value at 4.5, and I think it is value enough that I'd be happy to pick him for my game week 1 side. Anderson on the bench away at Brentford. Again, the Crystal Palace defender was very decent last season, has good set piece threat, or at least threat from set pieces. He doesn't take set pieces, as we said. What I do really like about him is he's also going to be good on the bonus this system in this season even, and also racks up the passes too. So I do like Anderson, probably at the same sort of level I like Dunk or Mykolenko, but that game week 1 fixture just isn't quite as good in my opinion. So happy to have him on the bench. The 4 million defender of choice at the moment for me is Harwood Bellis. Now, as a Southampton fan, I can tell you that he should be pretty nailed for us. I also do like the look of other 4 million defenders in Southampton's backline, and there are a couple at Ipswich and Leicester. I know the most about Harwood Bellis. He did actually get a couple of goals and a few assists last season as well. So Southampton fans love him. I'd be very, very surprised to see him benched or dropped at any point this season. He's very crucial to the way we play. And at 4 million, don't really expect to have to start him too often, only in a bit of a crisis. And the fixtures for the first 6 or 7 weeks for Southampton are actually pretty decent as well. So outside of that Newcastle away fixture, if he were to need to come in to my team at any point, I don't think it's a complete nightmare. So more than happy with him as my 4 million defender of choice. So let's move on to the midfield. And of course, Mo Salah makes it into my game week 1 draft. I would be pretty surprised if he wasn't in my game week 1 team by the time we get to the deadline. And that is, of course, because of Liverpool's fantastic run of fixtures to start off the season. I think they're top of the fixture ticker, or at least very close to in the first 6 or 7. And again, Ipswich away from home is a good low-hanging fruit fixture and a captaincy option in game week 1 as well. Obviously, the new system could bring challenges for Mo Salah and for Liverpool generally, but his data and the fact he's on penalties, the fact he's talismanic, all means that it's probably going to be a bit too much of a risk for me to go without him for such a good game week 1 fixture when I think the armband is going to be on him for the majority. There are other options. I do like the look of one other in particular, but I think the bus team captaincy is probably going to be on Mo Salah, and I can't really disagree with that too much. Let me know in the comments below whether or not you do agree with that, and whether or not you think Mo Salah is possibly going to fall back a little bit in our minds as one of the top FPL picks, because he is getting older, he is going to be playing a slightly different system, and we don't know whether Liverpool are going to hit the ground running under Arne Slot. My bet would be that they still perform pretty well this season because they've still got a great squad of players. Mo Salah is still an elite performer, and crucially, he's had the summer off as well, so he should be fit and firing, ready to go for game week 1, and I think it would take a brave FPL manager to go without him in our game week 1 side. Moving across, what I have done with this draft is probably the alternative to the pack midfield. I've gone slightly more budget, although I think all 3 represent really good value for money. The players that are missing are probably the bigger talking point here, though. Palmer, Foden, and Saka, no place for any of them in my game week 1 draft as it stands. But there is a way to get to them pretty easily. It is sacrificing one very, very important player to do so, but that is a decision that needs to be made going into game week 1. Whether or not you want a more packed midfield without 2 or 3 of these players that I'm showing you now, or you want a slightly less packed and more budget midfield, but I think they still represent good value. And of course, you've got a certain Norwegian striker there as well. In the meantime, let's talk about these 3 options. I think I'd be very surprised to see Anthony Gordon drop off too much from last season. There are, of course, whispers or rumours of a move across to Liverpool this season. I would be surprised if that happened, but of course, if it did, then we could readjust our thinking. And there are plenty of other 7 to 7.5 million options in midfield that we could look at. I do really like Newcastle's run of fixtures to start the season, though. And Gordon at home to Southampton. Southampton will be playing a bit of a high line as well. High possession. If they get caught on the break, away at St James's Park, Gordon and, of course, Isak, who I'll mention in a moment, will both profit from that. And again, Gordon's a player that just consistently improves season on season at the moment. I'd be very surprised if he didn't have yet another very strong season. At 7.5 million, even without penalties, I think he's great value for money. Moving across, Eze as well, I expect to have a very good season. Elise has left Crystal Palace, and that will make them arguably a little bit weaker overall. However, I do expect Eze to step up in his absence and become the chief creator in the side. And that's not to say last season he wasn't one of the chief creators. He was amazing last year and very good on the eye as well. But I think he'll have to take more of a focal point this year if Palace are going to repeat the form that they had at the back end of last season. He should be on all or very, very close to all set pieces, and Palace will rely on those quite a lot this season as well, especially with Mateta up front, especially with Anderson coming up for the corners as well. I do still expect Eze to have a good season, and at 7 million, I think it is good value for money. Although it must be said that there are other options at 6.5, 6 million, even 5.5 that you could downgrade him to after a couple of weeks if it's not looking like the safe bet that I would say it should be going into game 1. Finally, Leon Bailey had a great back end to the season last year, kind of displaced Diaby, who might now be off to Saudi Arabia, I believe, if rumours are to be believed anyway. And that should yet again put Bailey up in the estimations of Villa's starting 11 more regularly. His underlying data has always been fantastic. And when he starts games, he does get those returns. The only thing that has only ever been a problem for him is that consistency of starting. And I think finally under Emery, he found that slot of consistently starting week in, week out, and really starting to repay the faith shown in him by the manager. Aston Villa themselves have a good start to the season. Outside of the first 2 games, which maybe aren't amazing, the fixtures do turn really good after that around game 3. And Bailey at 6.5 million, I think represents fantastic value, especially looking at the underlying data that he always puts up. And there's no place for Ollie Watkins in my starting lineup at the moment. So Aston Villa coverage, until they get to the Champions League matches, I think will be quite important. I do expect them to get off to a strong start. So again, a bit of coverage going on there. But in his own right, that 6.5 million midfield slot, I think one of the stronger options is Leon Bailey. Finally, quick mention to the bench. Harry Winks comes in as my 4.5 million midfielder. This would be, on the whole, or on the main, a 3-4-3 formation. But of course, there are 4 good defenders there, so I can switch it to a 4-4-2 if I needed to in any given week. So on to the forwards, and of course, there is a spot for Haaland and Isak, who I've already mentioned in this video. Haaland is obviously going to be a debate. I think the shape and the structure of our drafts, mine and yours, will all come down to whether or not you want to incorporate Erling Haaland into that game week 1 side. I think a big factor is Ipswich in game week 2 at home. That's going to be a really heavily favoured captaincy option for game week 2. And going without him in game week 1 pretty much locks you into a Haalandless draft in game week 2, because you're only going to have 1 free transfer. It's going to be very tough to save 6 million, which you'd have to have in the bank if you're going to do it for free game week 2, because the most expensive alternative forward is Ollie Watkins, and that is at 9 million. So there's a big, big gap there. And I think having Haaland in your game week 1 draft all comes down to whether or not you see him being a big factor over the first 5 or 6 weeks, because otherwise it's going to be very tough to get to him. I think for me personally at this point, I'm more comfortable marginally to go in with the top player in each category. So Trent in defence, Salah in midfield, Haaland up front, and then it's only ever 1 free transfer to get away from them if you think you've made a mistake, or if another player is looking more likely to provide value for you. Whereas if you go without them, especially Haaland, where there's such a big jump from one player to the next, it's going to be really hard to rip your team apart to get to him. Even though we can roll transfers each week, I think it's going to be fanciful that by game week 3, 4, 5, we're going to have several free transfers to get across to him if it is clear that it's a mistake that you've gone without. And I think there are very good looking drafts without Haaland, and I'm certainly not ruling that out myself, because there are lots of good value midfielders that I can't get to, the Sakas, the Fodens, the Palmers of the world at the moment. It is a sacrifice, and arguably one that would need to be made. But Haaland, I think, does still provide decent value. Chelsea, not a great game, but after that, Ipswich at home, and then a good run of games. Well, Man City, any game's a decent game, and any game's got that chance that Haaland does provide a big return in. Like Salah, he's had the summer off. He'll be fit and firing and recharged and ready to go. And honestly, that's a pretty scary prospect that if he does well in game week 1 and you haven't got him, the fear factor to get to him for game week 2 is going to be really, really big. And I think, honestly, I'd prefer, at this point anyway, to just have him as a bit of a safety blanket in game week 1, and then I don't need to panic and use a transfer or use several transfers to get to him by game week 2 in case I do have a bit of a nervous disposition if he does well against Chelsea. So that's why Haaland's in there at the moment. I do agree that lots can be done if you don't have Haaland. That 6 million difference down to Ollie Watkins, who would be the likely replacement, is a big margin to make up in the midfield probably. And you can do a lot more with that money. So I can see it both ways. At the moment, I'm slightly edging towards a Haaland draft rather than a Haaland-less one. Moving across to Alexander Isak, I think he's pretty much in everyone's first game week 1 draft at the moment. So I won't bore you to death on him. I think he is a really important player to have. 8.5 million on penalties, unbelievably good data as well, and a really good track record in the Prem with a good game week 1 fixture and a good run of fixtures as well. I think it's just a very easy pick to go with. And of course, if he does get injured, if gets off to a bad start, that's fine. There are loads of other strikers around that price point that you can get to with one free transfer very, very easily. So very happy to have him in my game week draft, even if it is against me. However, the most interesting player in this draft, I think, arguably, is probably Adam Armstrong. Yes, I'm a Southampton fan. Please do feel free to tell me if you think I'm being a little bit biased here. But with doubts surrounding João Pedro at the moment, he didn't go on their pre-season camp with Brighton. That could be down to anything. He might just be a little bit injured or taking an extended break. We don't know at this point. But if that is a problem, the other 5.5 million striker that I do genuinely think will do well this season is Adam Armstrong. So a quick bit of bias, if you will, on it. He did score a lot of goals last year, 24, I think, in 52 starts. He also got 13 assists, so it wasn't all just coming from goals. He was on penalties. The underlying data was great. And whilst he's got a bit of an average, if not bad, track record in the Premier League, he did actually take a massive step up with us last season in the Championship, and he became much more of a leader. He became our talismanic figure, which he's never been in the past. He was never given that role before. So this is a kind of a new player that we're looking at. It's not the same Adam Armstrong that you probably would remember from 2 years ago in the Prem. He's much more nailed down. He's much more essential to the way we play. And I do genuinely believe that at 5.5 million, at times this season, he will provide very, very good value. Having any player that starts regularly at 5.5 is good, let alone on penalties and a talismanic 90-man figure. So I do like him. Yes, there's bias. But if João Pedro isn't the secure option that maybe we thought he would be going into game week 1, I think Adam Armstrong is an alternative that you should consider. And if I'm even slightly hesitant on João Pedro, I would not mind whatsoever going with Adam Armstrong in game week 1. The fixture in game week 1, not great, although it is against the old club. But after that, Southampton's run of fixtures are very good, and we'll be looking to get off to a fast start if we're going to survive this season. If we are going to, we're going to rely heavily on Adam Armstrong's goals. And like I said, it's good value. And let's be honest, it's your 11th man at this point. He's not the most essential player in your squad. It's a position I'm willing to take a bit of a gamble on. And what's a game week 1 draft without a little bit of fun in there? So Adam Armstrong is in it for me at the moment. But the situation can change. João Pedro could be absolutely fine to play in game week 1. And if that's the case, then there's a real 50-50 choice there. And of course, we've got more data on João Pedro too. So that could go either way. For the time being, I'm putting it on Armstrong. And let me know in the comments below whether or not you think that is unbelievably biased. If it is, fair enough. So I wanted to finish this video off by having a look at the Fantasy Football Hub team rating tool. And I'm delighted to say that for the first time, I'm going to be associated with them this season, which is great because it means that I can use much more advanced data and I can use all of their tools in my video too. So it means hopefully my videos are going to be a lot better this season. It also means that I can give you a link to 50% off this month before the start of the season if you wanted to also sign up to their app and get all of the tools that I will be showing you on my videos from now on. In the meantime, though, that's not important. What is important is taking a quick look at the team rating tool. 91% overall and 90% for this game week in particular, I think is a really good start. I've had to play around with different combinations and I do like this one as a balance. It's of course not the be all and end all. It is a bit of an estimate, but I think it gives you a good sense of how your team is shaping up. And I am pretty convinced that this is a good game week 1 draft because of the additional information that this has given. It also probably puts Salah at the top of my game week 1 rankings for captaincy, when before this video, I was probably slightly more convinced of going with Alexander Isak. Now, It's a good game week 1 fixture at home to Southampton. I do think he'll do well in that game, but Salah might be clearing away the best captain, and I do need to consider that when looking at a safe captain option for game week 1. I don't want to fall behind, but maybe that's an argument in itself to go against the grain and try and steal a march on your opponents by taking a bit of a gamble with captaincy. Let me know in the comments below who you think your favourite game week 1 captain is at this moment in time. And as we wrap up the video, please do feel free to leave a like and, importantly, subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed today's content. Loads more coming over the next few weeks. And of course, before I say goodbye, do remember to sign up to my mini league. The code is above. And I'll see you next time as we start preparing more and more for that game week 1 team select.